Somewhere in your head is a voice you haven't heard in 50 years, an opening rhyme or a slogan, the way one man said the time and the temperature. These were stations broadcasting to separate audiences in a separate America, and the people listening built their days around them. Most of those stations are gone now. The call letters belong to somebody else or to nobody at all. These are 25 radio stations that built Black America. Before we get into it, hit subscribe so you will not miss our next look back at what America lost. Number 25, WVOE in Chadbourn, North Carolina. Chadbourn is a small town in the southeastern corner of the state. Tobacco and strawberries. Not a place that turns up in histories of American broadcasting. But in 1962, a man named Ted Reynolds put a station on the air there and called it the Voice of Ebony. It was the 5th Black-owned radio station in the entire United States, the first one anywhere in rural America. Before New York had one, before Washington, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Oakland, or New Orleans, a town of a few thousand people in tobacco country beat all of them. And Reynolds did something else that year. He walked up to a woman's house, knocked on her door, and asked her to host a program for women. Her name was Annie Mae Williamson. She said yes. She was still doing that show 5 days a week in her 90s. Number 24, WOOK in Washington, D.C. WOOK belonged to a white broadcaster named Richard Eaton, and it spent the 50s and 60s as one of the most important black stations in the capital. Rhythm and blues records, black announcers, a real presence on a dial that mostly ignored the city's black majority. Then, in March of 1963, Eaton did something nobody in America had done. He put a television station on the air, Channel 14, programmed entirely for a black audience. The first one in the country, not a program, not a block, an entire station. It lasted 9 years. Channel 14 was UHF, which meant half the television sets in Washington could barely receive it, and the company fought license trouble the whole time. It went dark in February of 1972. The first black television station in America, and most people have never heard of it. Number 23, WHBQ in Memphis. Everybody knows Memphis had WDIA. Almost nobody remembers Memphis had a second one, and had it early. WHBQ was carrying programs aimed at black listeners as far back as the 1930s, and in 1949 it went all black, the second station in the city to do it. Its big early star was a man named George W. Lee. And Lee did not broadcast from the station. He did his show live from his own office at the Atlanta Life Insurance Company on Beale Street. A black businessman on Beale, running his insurance operation and his radio program out of the same room. That is what a black radio station looked like in 1949. Not a studio, wherever the man with something to say happened to be sitting. Number 22, WMRY in New Orleans. 600 on the dial, signed on in 1950, programmed for the black community of New Orleans. And every single night, it had to shut up. MRY was what the industry called a daytimer. 500 watts, licensed for daylight hours only, required to sign off at sundown so it would not interfere with bigger stations on the same frequency. Think about that in New Orleans. The music started after dark. The clubs opened after dark. The people who worked all day sat down after dark. And the station that belonged to them was legally required to be silent for all of it. That was not an accident of engineering. That was who got the powerful licenses and who did not. Number 21, WEUP in Huntsville, Alabama. In the whole United States, only 4 black-owned radio stations existed before this one. WEUP was the fifth to arrive in a mid-sized Alabama city in the heart of the segregated South. Not New York, not Chicago, Huntsville, Alabama. The pattern holds everywhere in this story. The first black-owned stations did not appear in the big northern markets where the money was. They appeared in the South, in small cities and small towns built by people who had no realistic path to a broadcast license and went and got one anyway. Number 20, WSOK in Nashville, December of 1951. Nashville was a radio town, one of the biggest in the country, and everything on the dial belonged to somebody else. WSOK went on the air as one of the first full-time all-black formatted stations in the United States. The owners were white, the voices were not, and the programs had names you would never hear on a network affiliate. Cook's Blues, Peace in the Valley. That second one tells you what these stations actually were. Not just record shows, gospel in the morning for the people going to work, the same music they would hear in church on Sunday coming out of a radio in a kitchen on a Tuesday. Number 19, WUFO in Buffalo, New York. Buffalo was not a major market and WUFO was not a major station, and that is exactly why it matters. Stations like WUFO were where the talent came from. A young man could get behind a microphone in a city nobody was watching, learn the job, and then leave. One of the men who did that was Frankie Crocker. He started at WUFO. He went to New York, and he became the most influential black broadcaster in America. Every big name on the big stations came from somewhere small first. UFO was one of those somewheres. Number 18, WEDR in Birmingham, Alabama. Within a year of Nat D. Williams going on the air at WDIA in Memphis, WEDR in Birmingham had seen enough and switched to all-black programming. 1 year. That is how fast it moved. For 20 years, the industry had told itself there was no black audience worth programming for. One station in Memphis proved otherwise, and stations across the South converted almost immediately because everybody had known all along, and nobody had wanted to say it out loud. Birmingham was, at that moment, one of the most violently segregated cities in America. And it had a radio station playing black music to black listeners on the public airwaves. If a station on this list is one you grew up with, stay with me. The biggest names are still ahead. Number 17, WLOU in Louisville, Kentucky. WLOU came on the air in November of 1948 as Louisville's sixth radio station, 1,000 watts, daytime only, playing country and Western music. 3 years later, it threw the whole format out and switched to rhythm and blues, hired black disc jockeys, and became one of the first stations in America programmed for a black audience. The same thing had just happened in Memphis, a station that could not make it doing what everybody else was doing, that turned to the audience nobody was serving, and found out that audience had been waiting. One of the early voices was a man they called Jockey Jack Gibson. But the real story at WLOU is a minister named William Summers. In 1967, he became the first African American in the United States to manage a radio station. 4 years after that, he bought it outright. The man who ran the station ended up owning it. That happened almost nowhere else in this entire history. Number 16, WLIB in New York. WLIB was on the air in 1944, which makes it one of the earliest stations in the country aimed at black listeners, and it sat in the largest media market on earth. What made it different was who it decided its audience was. New York was not one black community. It was Harlem, it was Brooklyn, and it was the West Indian neighborhoods filling with people from Jamaica and Trinidad and Barbados. WLIB served all of it. Calypso and reggae alongside gospel, and political talk alongside both. There is a story from those years about a disc jockey named Sonny Jim who started out on WLIB as Farmer Jim playing country music. When the station moved to black programming, Farmer Jim became Sonny Jim and stayed. Number 15, WWRL in New York. If WLIB was the community station, WWRL was the powerhouse. 1600 on the AM dial, and through the 1960s, it was where New York went for soul music. The records, the personalities, the sound of the city. Frankie Crocker came here from Buffalo. He was on WWRL before he was anywhere else in New York, and this is where the voice that would define black radio for 20 years got its first real audience. You will hear where he went next. He is on this list twice. Number 14, WHUR in Washington, D.C. On the 10th of December, 1971, at 6 in the evening, Howard University turned on a radio station at 96.3 FM. The first song they played was Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Negro National Anthem performed by the Howard University Choir. The second song they played was the theme from Shaft. That is the whole thing right there, the hymn and the funk back to back in the first 4 minutes. WHUR called its format 360 Degrees of the Black Experience. News, music, and information, and it was the only black-formatted FM station in Washington. Everything else, WOOK and WOL and WUST, was AM. It was also the only station in the city on the air 24 hours a day, which meant that at 3 in the morning in Washington, there was exactly one voice available, and it belonged to Howard University. A student worked there and learned the business. Her name was Kathy Hughes. Number 13, WOL in Washington, D.C. The Washington Post once wrote that between about 1965 and 1975, no other medium in the city had WOL's influence and credibility among black Washingtonians. Not a newspaper, not a television station, a radio station on the AM dial. WOL is also where Washington got a nickname it still carries, Chocolate City. And in April of 1968, when Martin Luther King was killed and cities across America went up, a disc jockey named Petey Green went on the air in Washington and talked. People credit what he said that night with helping to calm the streets. A man with a microphone in a burning city talking his own neighborhood down. Then Kathy Hughes, who had learned the business at Howard, bought WOL with her husband. She turned it into a talk station that spoke directly to black Washington, and then she bought another station and another. That company is Urban One. It owns radio stations across the United States and a television network. It started with one AM signal in Washington, D.C. Number 12, WGES in Chicago. Chicago already had the most respected black broadcaster in America. Jack Cooper had been on the air since 1929. He was careful, he was dignified, and he would not play what he called gut bucket blues. He thought it made his people look bad. Then WGES put a man named Al Benson on the air. Benson was everything Cooper was not. Loud suits, flashy jewelry, big cars, and he played the records Cooper refused to touch, the raw blues coming up from Mississippi with the people moving north. He buried him. There is a line from another Chicago disc jockey, Lucky Cordell, who watched the whole thing happen. Jack Cooper was first on the scene, he said, but he did not fill the need. Benson was shrewd enough to see it and fill it. Benson went on to help start record labels. Parrot, Blue Lake, Old Swing Master. They called him the godfather of black radio, and in 2017, he went into the Blues Hall of Fame. Number 11, WDAS in Philadelphia. Philadelphia had a radio station where the disc jockeys were bigger than most of the acts they played. Jocko Henderson opened every show with a rhyme, and there are people in Philadelphia today who can still recite it word for word 70 years later without stopping to think. Georgie Woods was on WDAS too. They called him the guy with the goods, and he was not just spinning records. He was booking Motown and Stax artists into the Uptown Theater in North Philadelphia, which meant the man on the radio was also the man deciding who came to town. That is what a station like WDAS actually was. Not a place that reported on the music scene, a place that ran it. Jocko took it somewhere nobody expected. He built a company called Get Ready that made teaching materials for schools, using rhyme to teach American history and spelling. Then he ran for Congress. Number 10, WBLS in New York. Frankie Crocker started in Buffalo. He came to New York and worked WWRL. And then he got to WBLS and he did the thing his whole career had been building toward. He invented a format. Before Crocker, a black station played black records. Crocker refused to work that way. He put a soul record next to a rock record, next to a jazz record, next to a disco record, on the theory that his audience was not a demographic to be segregated. It was a group of people with taste. The industry gave that a name: urban contemporary. It became the dominant format in American radio for the next 30 years, and every station running it today is running Frankie Crocker's idea. He called himself the Chief Rocker. He was not being modest, and he did not need to be. Number 9, WLAC in Nashville. 1510 on the dial, 50,000 watts, clear channel. At night, that signal covered 40 states and reached somewhere between 5 and 15 million people. WLAC played rhythm and blues after dark to the entire American South, and for a lot of black listeners in the rural South, this was the only place to hear it at all. There was no record store that would sell it to them, so the station sold it directly over the air by mail from a shop up the road in Gallatin, Tennessee. Every single one of the disc jockeys was white. Most of the audience did not know that, and the station never went out of its way to correct them. We made an entire video about that one, but it belongs on this list because whatever the men behind the microphone looked like, WLAC did something no black-owned station in America had the wattage to do. It reached everybody at once. Number 8, KSOL in San Francisco. KSOL went to a black format in 1964 and ran it for 7 years. One of the disc jockeys there was a young man from Vallejo who was also making records on the side, producing for a local label and putting together a band with his brother and sister in it. His name on the air was Sly. He worked KSOL and he worked across the bay at KDIA, and then in 1968, a record he made called Dance to the Music went off like a bomb, and he never came back to the studio. Sly and the Family Stone changed American popular music. Their frontman learned the audience by talking to them at night on the radio first. Number 7, KDIA in Oakland. 1310 on the dial. They called it Lucky 13. The station had been on the air since 1922, under other call letters owned by a family named Warner who had nothing to do with the movie studio. During the war, when black workers came to Oakland by the tens of thousands to work the shipyards, the stations started playing their records and reading their news, and it became something like a bulletin board of the air for West Oakland, church services, club dates on 7th Street, where to find the records nobody else carried. In 1959, the man who owned WDIA in Memphis bought it and renamed it KDIA after his Memphis station. The talent that came through there is remarkable. Sly Stone, Belva Davis, who went on to become the first black woman television journalist on the West Coast, and a man named Don Barksdale. Barksdale became the Bay Area's first black disc jockey in 1948 because professional basketball would not have him. He had just been the first African American to play on a United States Olympic basketball team and the first to win a gold medal, and the National Basketball Association was still closed to black players. When it finally opened, he went. In 1953, he became the first African American ever to play in an NBA All-Star game. Then he came back to radio. Then in 1992, the mayor of Oakland and the former Speaker of the California Assembly bought KDIA together. After 70 years, it was finally black-owned. Number 6, KGFJ in Los Angeles. A disc jockey named Nathaniel Montague worked KGFJ in the middle of the 1960s and called himself the Magnificent Montague. And when a record got good to him, he would shout 3 words, "Burn, baby, burn." That was all it meant. A hot record. Kids called the hotline, said their name and their high school, and got to yell it back on the air. Then on the 11th of August, 1965, 2 police officers stopped a car in Watts. 6 days later, 34 people were dead, $40 million of the city had burned, and 14,000 National Guardsmen were on the streets of Los Angeles. And the thing the crowds had been chanting was "Burn, baby, burn." The Los Angeles Times ran a front-page story explaining where the phrase came from. The mayor and the chief of police went to KGFJ and demanded they fire him. The station would not, so they cut his hours instead. Then they cut them again. Then they cut them until there was nothing left, and he was gone. He changed the phrase. "Have mercy," he started saying, and then "Learn, baby, learn," and he spent years telling young listeners to stay in school. Now here is where it ends up. In 1969, an engineer writing the software that would land Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon needed a name for the routine that fires the descent engine. He called it Master Ignition Routine, and above it in the code he wrote 3 words, "Burn, baby, burn." One of the engineers said later that he took it from Montague directly. Another said it came from what everybody was hearing on the news that year. Either way, it traces back to the same place. A man on an AM station in Los Angeles shouting about a record he liked. Number 5, WSBC in Chicago. In 1925, a man named Jack Cooper had a radio job in Washington, D.C. The job was to perform comedy sketches in Negro dialect written for white listeners, mocking the way black people spoke. He quit and went back to Chicago to make a show for a black audience instead. No station in the city would take it. Finally, a man who owned a small station called WSBC said yes. The call letters stood for World Storage Battery Company. It was a battery factory that also had a transmitter, and its business model was selling airtime to whichever immigrant group wanted to buy an hour. Cooper got his hour and sold the advertising himself. But the program that says the most about that station came later. In 1938, Cooper started Search for Missing Persons. The Great Migration was moving millions of black Americans north, and people lost each other. A brother went to Chicago and stopped writing. A mother did not know which city her son was in. Nobody was looking for them. So a radio station read the names out on the air, and people found each other. By 1947, Cooper's company controlled about 40 hours a week across 4 Chicago stations, and almost none of it survives. The recordings were not kept. The first black voice in American broadcasting is very nearly lost. Number 4, WCHB in Inkster, Michigan. Everybody else on this list who owned a station bought one that already existed. Haley Bell was a dentist in Detroit. In the mid-1950s, he did not buy a station. He built one from the ground up, from nothing, the first Black American ever to do it. That sounds technical until you think about what it required. Finding the frequency, getting a license out of a Federal Communications Commission that had never granted one to a man like him. Raising the money with no broadcast collateral and no white partner. Putting up a tower. A dentist did that. And WCHB stayed Black-owned and Black-programmed for decades afterward. Number 3, KPRS in Kansas City, 1950. Andrew and Mildred Carter put a station on the air in Kansas City, the first Black-owned station west of the Mississippi River. It is still Black-owned today, which makes KPRS the oldest continuously Black-owned radio station in the United States. Think how many stations on this list have already dropped out of that sentence. Sold, reformatted, call letters given to somebody else. KPRS held. The Carters also understood that owning one station was not enough. They helped found the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters, an organization built for the specific purpose of fighting over who gets to hold a license in this country. Number 2, WEDR in Atlanta, October 1949. A man named Jesse Blayton bought a radio station in Atlanta for $50,000 and became the first Black American to own one. Blayton was not a broadcaster. He was an accountant, a bank president, and a professor at Atlanta University. Exactly the kind of man who could put together $50,000 in 1949 and who had every reason not to spend it on a radio station. And then there is the building. WEDR studio was on the second floor. On the first floor was the office of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Martin Luther King worked directly beneath a Black-owned radio station. The story people in Atlanta tell is that he would knock on the ceiling with a broom handle when he had something to say, and they would lower a microphone down to him. Whether that happened exactly that way or not, the physical fact is not in dispute. The civil rights movement and the first Black-owned radio station in America shared an address. Number 1, WDIA in Memphis. WDIA went on the air in June of 1947 as the 6th radio station in Memphis owned by 2 white men playing country and pop records for white listeners. It was a failure. By the autumn of 1948, it was close to going under. So they tried something out of desperation. They gave a half hour to a high school teacher and newspaper columnist named Nat D. Williams, aimed at the one audience in Memphis that no station in the city was serving. Half of Memphis was Black. Nobody had ever programmed a minute for them. The show was called Tan Town Jubilee. Nat D. Williams became the first widely known Black voice on the air anywhere in the segregated South. And within a year, WDIA was the second most listened to station in Memphis. Then it went all Black permanently and went to number 1. The people who came through that building are the history of American music. B.B. King had a show. Rufus Thomas had a show. Bobby Blue Bland cut some of his first records in the studio. By 1954, the station was running 50,000 watts, reaching down through the Mississippi Delta all the way to the Gulf Coast, and it became the first station in Memphis to gross $1 million in a year. And the station gave the money back. WDIA ran 2 concerts a year and put the proceeds into a fund that bought buses to carry disabled Black children to school, paid for college scholarships, and sent money to a Black orphanage in the city. Things Memphis would not pay for itself. A station that was about to die, that survived, by finally speaking to the people it had spent a year ignoring. That is the whole story of black radio in one building, 25 stations from a separate America. They are mostly gone now. The signals belong to somebody else. Some are talk stations, some are simulcasts of something recorded 500 miles away, and some of those frequencies are just noise. But the sound they made did not go anywhere. Every format on American radio today descends from something one of these stations did first because it had no other choice. They were built by people locked out of the industry, and they ended up teaching the industry how to sound. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and watch the next video above.